Joining me now from Calgary is Jason Kenney, United Conservative Party leader of Alberta. Welcome to the show, Mr. Kenney. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you, Mercedes.
My first question for you, you're heading into an election year. You've talked a lot about what you would do differently from Rachel Notley, but specifically when it comes to pipelines, how would you have handled the situation differently? How would you have gotten pipelines built?
Well, I think the huge mistake that Premier Notley made was writing Justin Trudeau a blank political check, creating an alliance with the Trudeau government that has done everything it can to prevent us from getting a pipeline built. Prime Minister Trudeau, who vetoed the Northern Gateway pipeline, killed Energy East, surrendered to Barack Obama's veto of Northern Gateway, and has completely bungled the Trans Mountain expansion. She imposed a carbon tax on Albertans, supposedly in exchange for market access, a pipeline that hasn't worked. So I think what we need to do is pull the camera back and understand we're involved in a strategic fight. There's been hundreds of millions of dollars spent, largely from foreign sources, in a campaign to vilify Canadian energy, not Saudi or Venezuelan or Russian oil, but Canadian oil. And I think we need to push back much more vigorously. That's part of my fight back strategy.
So how do you get around things, for example, like Quebec saying no to Energy East? Do you push the federal government to force the province to let it through? Do you ignore the court order that has put Trans Mountain on pause? How far do you go to make those pipelines have shovels in the ground?
Well, first of all, it's the federal government of Justin Trudeau that killed Energy East with the acquiescence of the NDP here in Alberta. And no, the federal government doesn't need to push it through against provincial objections, because under the Constitution, the federal government has the exclusive jurisdiction over interprovincial pipelines. Now, the new Premier of New Brunswick, Blaine Higgs, is trying to get a revival of the failed Energy East pipeline. He's saying, what Justin Trudeau
Quebec is saying no way. There is no way they'll allow it to go through.
Because Prime Minister Trudeau said that it will only happen if the government of Quebec is in favor. He gave Quebec a veto it does not have under the Constitution. And then the Premier of Quebec said that he was that there was, quotes, no social acceptability for dirty Alberta oil, the same week that he got a 10%, $1.3 billion increase in equalization payments. So at the end of the day, Mercedes, what we would be prepared to do in Alberta is to put on the table the whole question of equalization in the country. Albertans are generous. They don't mind sharing some of our wealth when times are good here but bad elsewhere. But we cannot abide is other parts of the country that benefit from our energy wealth, in turn trying to block its development and export. That is not acceptable, and we need a fair deal in this federation.
When it comes to that Western alienation that you're talking about, I interviewed the Prime Minister at the end of 2018, and he said politicians such as yourself are using this as a wedge point, that you're exploiting that frustration, and it's essentially making things worse. What's your response to that?
Look, this is the Prime Minister who drives wedges everywhere he can. He's the Prime Minister who, when Prime Minister Harper was in office, said that the country was a mess because, quotes, Albertans were governing the country. This is not, look, I think that we have an opportunity here to reinforce national unity. Albertans don't mind sharing some of our wealth as long as our partners in the Federation are willing to actually develop that resource, our oil and gas, to get a fair global price for it. We've been in a period of prolonged economic stagnation and decline in Alberta in the past few years, partly because Canada's largest export product, the third largest oil reserves in the world, Alberta oil, has been sold at a huge discount compared to the global price. That's partly because we cannot get to global markets with the Coastal Pipeline. All we're asking for...
Mr. Kenney.
Yes, Mercedes.
When it comes to that frustration, though, there's been some undesirable elements that you're seeing trying to attach itself, some through the Yellow Vest movement. You're a former Minister of Immigration, and some of these statements are racist, they're xenophobic, they're anti-immigrant. Are you worried that that frustration could be exploited by some groups who have some pretty concerning values?
I'm not exactly sure what you're referring to, Mercedes. I can tell you in the last few weeks there have been multiple huge rallies with thousands, or collectively tens of thousands of Albertans calling for fairness in the Federation, for a coastal pipeline to be built. perhaps amongst those tens of thousands of people, there were a handful that with kooky ideas, which I would certainly condemn. But that doesn't change the fact that Albertans right across the political spectrum are simply asking for fairness in the federation. This is not a marginal political goal. This is I think something that's in the best interests of all Canadians.